Welcome to Legends, a series that delves into the lore within Horizon Forbidden West. In this video, we'll be examining what is perhaps the most impactful and tragic era of the 31st century, a decade-long conflict that would stretch from the savage East to the Forbidden West, ravaging the peoples of Horizon's tribal world. A time of blood and death, known to some as the Buried Years, but more commonly as the Red Raids. For much of Carja history, the tribe's leadership would rely on influence over conquest to expand the power of the Sundom. Through trade, commerce, and strategically appointed advisors, surrounding tribes such as the Oseram and Banuk would become somewhat dependent on the City of the Sun, ensuring the continued prosperity of the Carja. However, a dramatic shift in policy would lay the foundation for the slaughter that would later ensue. Since the reign of the 9th Sun King Renan, Meridian hadn't faced a serious threat from beyond their borders. This would lead to the next two generations in the Radiant Line turning their focus away from military might and towards cultural growth. In this time, the famed Hunter's Lodge would be founded, numerous great works of arts were commissioned, and the dilapidated fortress of Sunfall was renovated to a shimmering summer palace. As these projects continued to garner resources from the Sundom, the ranks of their military would gradually deplete, a potentially weakened state that would soon be corrected. As the 12th in the Radiant Line came to power, Sun King Hivas, it would become his life's work to bring a new age of military superiority to his tribe, unlike any seen before. By his command, each family with a suitable male child would submit them to replenish and grow the Sundom's armies. Artisans that had been producers of fine art would turn their attention to crafting the finest armor, bows, and halberds for every soldier of the sun. In this, Meridian would now stand ready for any threat that would dare strike the Carja Sundom. But for the remainder of his reign, this giant would remain a sleeping one. Upon his passing, his son, Jiran, would become the 13th Sun King of the Carja. Early in his reign, he would be touted as a strong leader, using the might and influence built by his father to defend his lands from encroachment of other tribes. But one fateful day, their world would change for reasons beyond their comprehension. August 26th, 3020. Gaia Prime would receive a transmission of unknown origin. This extinction signal would force the hand of the governing AI to self-destruct, robbing the subordinate function Hades of the means to reverse terraforming the planet, saving Earth from another extinction. Though complete catastrophe was avoided, without Gaia's guidance, Zero Dawn systems would start to deteriorate, becoming ever more chaotic. Far from King's Peak, those in the City of the Sun would watch in awe as the mountain fell, only able to speculate on what brought about this strange phenomena. As Jiran sat firmly as the sole ruler of his tribe, far to the west, another was solidifying himself as a ruler of this tribal world. In the heart of the Forbidden West, the lowland commander Hekaro would fell all who had opposed him, claiming the sacred memorial grove of the Tenakth as his own. In this moment of supreme conquest, he too would feel the effects of Gaia's fall. As the subordinate functions scattered across the world, Aether would take refuge within the grove. Its arrival would send a surge of energy through the ancient museum, revealing a hologram seen by no Tenakth before. After witnessing Anne Faraday's Unity address, the warlord would fundamentally change, and so too the warring ways of the Tenakth. As chief of the unified clans, he would put an end to the internecine war that had defined the Tenakth for generations, and turn their infamous ferocity against the machines as one people. Back in the Sundom, the Carja would come to walk a very different path. As time passed, the smoke and ash would settle, but something far more lasting remained. The machines the tribe had hunted since their earliest days, once skittish, had begun to turn aggressive. This wasn't all, as new machines began to emerge, each more dangerous than the last, whose sole purpose was to turn tribal hunters into the hunted. This machine madness would be dubbed the derangement, and would puzzle scholars, mystics, and tinkerers alike. As his people suffered at the hands of the machines, and with no concrete answers in sight, Duran's priests began to hold more and more sway over him, believing this madness was rooted in the divine. Since the tribe's inception, the Karja have worshipped the sun as their life-giving deity, and those of the Radiant Line as its speaker and human incarnation. In the tribe's distant past, when a crisis had emerged or a harvest had failed, slaves or captives had been sacrificed in sun rings to bring back the favor of the sun. These draconian rituals would eventually evolve over time into theatrical performances or gladiatorial games, but in such desperate times, Karja religious fundamentalism would rise in hopes of appeasing the sun once more and calming the hostile machines. As Speaker of the Sun, Duran decreed that an entire generation be cut from each village the Sun's Chosen came across, to cut down on those who might stand against them in subsequent raids, and more willingly surrender sacrifices in the days that followed. And so, through divine right, and with the Karja at the height of their power, Duran's armies would set forth to kill, pillage, and capture. The Red Raids had begun. To the north, raiders would set their sights on the Oseram, a campaign led by one whose name would echo in infamy, the Terror of the Sun, Helis. Under the Kestrel's command, the Karja brutality stretched across the region. Despite being formidable warriors and tinkerers, the loosely confederated clans of the Claim could not fend off the invaders, as they captured and killed countless. Karja records claim that the slaughter was so staggering that Helis would pile the corpses of fallen Oseram high enough against their walls that his troops could climb over to continue their rampage. Warriors who did survive, such as Erend, Ursa, and Derval, did what they could to fight back and free the captured, but couldn't fully drive them from their lands. To the northeast, the frozen lands of the Banuk would feel the fury of the Sun's Chosen. Raiding parties would clash with defending Werix south of the tribal capital of Ban-Ur, in a region that would come to be known as the Cut. Warriors like Aratak would defend that strip of ice and snow countless times year after year. Despite many brave warriors meeting their end, those who had survived endured and prevailed. Though mostly being able to keep the Karja from pushing deeper into the territory, many were still captured, including the shaman, Aurea. Instead of meeting her end, however, the Karja would force her to use her knowledge and connection with the machines to ensnare them, to be used in the Sun Ring's ritualistic sacrifice. To the east, raiders struck out at the Nora. Though formidable warriors all Mother's Chosen would suffer greatly as well. Villages within the Valley Meat region, like Mother's Tears and Mother's Vigil, would be lost during the Karja incursion, bodies draped from trees as grim warnings of the constant brutality. But they would go no further. Legendary warriors like Sona would defend the Embrace, and from the great fortress of Mother's Crown, they would hold the line. Over the course of the war, the fortress survived 15 Karja assaults and broke 3 attempted invasions, feats few in the tribal world could claim against the power of the Sundom. But even these devastating campaigns did not appease an angry sun, or the bloodlust of its speaker. He would eventually send forces past Sunfall, through the canyons of the Daunt, to prey upon those in the Forbidden West. Where his forebear Arib had perished generations before, the army of the setting sun would continue Duran's merciless will. From the fortress of Barren Light, the Karja set forth, with the Utaru first to feel their malice. Despite the efforts of those in high command like Vashav to mitigate such atrocities, those who called Plainsong home were captured or slaughtered en masse. Diplomatic tactics that had preserved their peaceful way of life for generations failed in the face of zealous raiders. Accounts state that so much blood was spilt in their fields that the following harvest, the maize grew black and blue. As the raiders pushed further west into the desert, the Karja began to skirmish with Tenakth scouts. Even with their ferocity and skill, these first squads were simply outnumbered and would suffer greatly at the hands of the enemy. Those like Marshal Regala's brother would be captured and made an example of. They were burned alive, found by their comrades by the sound of their screams. These affronts would eventually spur the Tenakth into action, as Hekarro called the clans together to resist the raiders. But they would do far more than defend, but more on that soon. Close to the claim, Oseram freebooters would attempt to intercept a group of raiders, bringing prisoners back to the capital. Here, Ursa, Erend, and Derval would launch their surprise attack. The fighting was fearsome, and the prisoners were liberated, but not without cost. In order to buy the time necessary for success, Ursa would be taken prisoner and sent to face down death in the Sun Ring. Thankfully, through skill and unwavering determination, she prevailed against Machine and Kestrel alike. Her reward was to be made a palace slave in the City of the Sun. There, her and Jiran's second son, Avad, formed a kinship and worked together to orchestrate her escape, where she would make her way back to the claim, a relationship that would prove pivotal in the latter stages of the war. Years of slaughter and sacrifice had already passed, and yet the madness of the machines persisted. The Sundom's response, Jiran's response, even more blood was yet needed. In addition to the countless who had been captured and enslaved from far-off lands, the pitiless gaze of the Sun King would turn upon his own people. These Karja would meet the same fate as those who they had watched so many times be led to the slaughter. Even with such peril more than assured, there were some within Meridian who would speak out against their king. Hawks of the Hunter's Lodge like Talavad and Bratavin Khan Padish called out for Jiran to end his slaughter. In return, they too would be sentenced to the same fate. At sunfall, they and more who would come to their aid would fight to the last. All would perish, left dead on the sand. Even Jiran's eldest, and heir to the throne, Kataman of the Dawn's Rising, could not bear the deeds of his father. When he too denounced him, Jiran watched as his own son was butchered in that ring of death. Fearing for his own life, Jiran's second son, Avad, fled the capital in search of a friend in the north that could help him end his father's reign. Back in the west, the Karja would soon face down the first real threat to their tribal dominance, one more fierce than their wildest imaginings. The Tenakth and Karja had clashed before in the past, when the 6th Sun King Arif and his cohort fell in the west, and when the 9th Sun King Renan pushed back a clan invasion years ago. However, things had changed for the Masters of the West. Under Hekarro, for the first time in their history, the clans were united. At the Karja forward position south of Plainsong, the Tenakth laid waste to their enemy. A defeat so colossal after the war, those in Meridian came to believe there were no survivors. The only Karja we know to have come out alive were Fashav, who was captured, and Nil, who eventually found his way back to the east. The Battle of Cinnabar Sands represents a massive defeat for the Karja, and a turning point in their raids in the west. The overconfident Karja would suffer another staggering defeat at the Battle of the Burning Blooms, where both the Southern Spear and the Flash Brigade were crushed by the might of the Tenakth. The combined clans, along with Utaru guerrilla fighters such as Zoe, would eventually push the Karja all the way back to their stronghold of Barren Light. Behind their walls of stone, the Sun's Chosen thought themselves safe, but this too would be their undoing. Led by the Sky Clan warrior Kotalo, he and his squad climbed the cliffs of the Daunt until they were behind enemy lines. Once infiltrated, they would open the gates of Barren Light from the eastern side. Tenakth and their allies poured in, defeating the remaining Karja, and razed the fortress. Some, like Regala, wished to continue their campaign of vengeance all the way to the gates of Meridian, a war they might have won, but would cost more Tenakth lives. Instead, with the Karja no longer a threat in the west, Hekarro ordered his people to fall back, a decision that would cause deep divisions and eventual rebellion. In the east, Avad and several trusted honor guards had successfully made their way out of the Sundom and crossed into Osram lands. There, he would meet with Ursa and her freebooters, solidifying a tentative alliance in hopes of overthrowing his father. But there was one sizable hurdle. Among them, like Derval and Asera, had no intention of honoring this agreement, only planning to use Avad to unseat his father and dispose of him as well, once his usefulness had come to an end. Thankfully, Erend had secretly overheard this scheme, and Derval and his co-conspirators were foiled, allowing Avad and Ursa's plan for the liberation of Meridian to proceed. In order for Avad to succeed in this colossal task, two things would be needed: Karja support and Osram ingenuity. Though some still held firm in Jiran's divine providence, many were ready for his bloody reign to come to an end. The first to turn against his king and join the prince was the Karja officer Balan and his company. At first he was apprehensive, but after the Osram dissenters had been dealt with, they became steadfast allies to the cause. In addition to more manpower, greater firepower would also be needed to even the odds. Petra Forgewoman would have the answer to that problem. Fashioned from machine parts, a cannon strong enough to shake the walls and turn the Sun King's army into blood and feathers. After months of preparation, Avad and his allies were finally ready, and they crossed into the Sundom. As they marched towards the capital, more and more Karja defected to the cause, ready to see Jiran dethroned. Once they arrived, the rebels put their plan into motion. With the city's defenses manned by seasoned kestrels, the Osram cannons were unleashed on the gates and the outer walls. As the smoke began to clear, Avad's three-pronged attack began. While the main force stormed the barricaded gate, Urid, the greatest climber in all the Sundom, and his group scaled the cliffs beneath the Temple of the Sun, while the final group crossed the aqueducts straight into the palace itself. The fighting was fierce, but when defeat seemed inevitable for Jiran, he instructed his loyal sun priests and kestrels to flee the city with his youngest son Itamen and his mother Nisadi. With victory at hand, Avad and Ursa confronted Jiran at the palace. Though official records would later state Avad struck down his father, in truth, Ursa would deal the final blow. With his demise, a new era would dawn, unlike any in Karja history. The murder of a true Sun King, however monstrous, was an unthinkable act, and one that left the tribe divided. As dawn broke once more over Meridian, many took this as a sign that the sun had renounced Jiran's legitimacy, and the true Sun King, Avad, 14th in the Radiant line, now reigned. To those who had been loyal to Jiran, they did not share in this interpretation. They would view Itamen, Jiran's chosen heir, as the true heir to the throne, displaced in Sunfall. As it states in the scripture of the Sun Faith, verse 6, Holy Meridian shall forever be the seat of the Karja, the city of the sun, and the spire, venerated as the mark of its founding. A Sun King born of the Radiant line shall always sit upon its throne, for without a speaker for the sun, its will is clouded. For either of these to be denied is to invite a twilight time upon us. In this, those in Sunfall believed a time of twilight was upon them, and thus, with the sun's will clouded, they were indeed Karja in shadow. This faction and interpretation of the Sun Faith would also give rise to the cult of the Eclipse, believing that the buried shadow of prophecy had returned and would usher in great and terrible change, but ultimately bring a new dawn once again. After Itamen and Nisadi fled, the leadership of the Shadow Karja fell, and the Battle of Meridian was won. Many came to accept Avad as their rightful Sun King, but some still saw him as nothing more than a usurper, guilty of patricide. Led by the Sun Priest Savahar, his followers decided to head west in search of a new home. He decreed, "The long night ends, and the setting sun will lead us to salvation." His people, the Order of Twilight, would make it all the way to the Daunt before he would perish, forcing them to take refuge in Chainscrape. Over the course of a decade, with thousands lost, The Red Raids is a terrible touchstone for those in the 31st century, with all the known tribes in North America scarred by its memory. Where Jiran fueled an endless war until his dying breath, Avad has made his reign a mission of peace and reconciliation, building bridges across multiple peoples in hopes of a time the Red Raids may never come again. And that brings our journey to an end. If you'd like to see more content like this, likes and shares are always appreciated. And if you're really hungry for more Horizon lore, consider subscribing and checking out the rest of our lore library. Also check out our channel memberships so you can see exclusive content on the lore of Horizon. And as always, thanks for watching and keep questing.